have our header made, we have our first link made, we have our default route, and as of right now, when we click on this, we have a second route that matches /GitHub that just renders some inline JSX. So let's make an actual GitHub component then. So go to your source folder. We're going to make a new file. Let's call it github.js. So we made new components a bunch of times. What's the first thing I need to do? Import React. Then what? We don't need to import React router DOM, right? Because well, I mean, maybe we will eventually if we end up rendering a route in here, but we decide if it's a class or anonymous function. And we know, based on our end product here, that we have a form and stuff in it. So which one are we probably going to need? Class, right? Because we're going to need to keep track of state, what's in this form. So class GitHub extends component. And last but not least, export it, right? And we also know that we are going to need a render method, right? So for right now, just to make sure we've wired everything up correctly, let's just have it return what we were returning before, which was this h1. So just import the React library, make our component class a render method that just returns an h1, and export that. And we are going to use that in app.js instead of the render method that we had here. So you can just get rid of that. And instead, we're just going to tell it what component to render. And if I'm going to use the component, what else do I need to do in this file? Import it. From /GitHub, right? So theoretically, what should we see when we click on /GitHub now? Same thing, right? Because as of right now, our GitHub component, which we just made, is still rendering the exact same thing. Maybe just to make sure it's something different, we'll say GitHub component just so we can see something visually different. But there you go. Definitely the GitHub component. So that was pretty easy, right? Routing's not too hard. Do a quick commit on that. All right, so we know we don't actually want to render an h1. What do we want to render? Looks like we got an image here and then a form with a button, single input and button. I think we probably know enough to be able to do that now, right? Allegedly. All right, so let's do We know that everything has to be the child of a single component, right? For us to return it. So let's make a wrapper div. Just give it a class of GitHub. Not capital G. There we go. And the first thing was that GitHub logo, right? We'll give that a class name as well so we can style it. And then you can look around on Google Images if you want to find your own logo, or just paste it in Slack there. So you can drop that in there for the source. And then, of course, because we're nice people, we're going to put an alt on here as well. It says what it is. It's the GitHub logo. I'll move this onto separate lines. It's a bit easier to read. And then we also need our form, right? And it just has a single input in it. Type is text. And then there was a button too, right? Actually, we should wrap it in a div first. And the button says look up GitHub user. All right, so far, the logo is way too big, and our input's way too small. But it's all there, right? All the markup is. So let's make it look reasonable first. That seems like a good idea. So we're going to need a CSS file for this component, right? Add a new file. GitHub.css. And again, this is a lot of rules, so I'm not going to have you type all of them out. I'll drop them in Slack. But basically, setting that div to 80% width, margin 0 auto centers it. So we made it 80% of the page width and then put it in the middle. Made the logo 100% of the width of the container, which is 80% width, and gave it a max width, so even on very large screens it doesn't get ridiculously large. Use the font. Make the input 80% of the width of its parent container, which is 80% of the page. Give it some padding, some border radius, reasonable height. Make the button nice and blue, and give it some margin so it's not right up on the input. You know, that sort of thing. To get these styles to work, what do we need to do? Import it into the component, right? So now, theoretically, it should look pretty. And it does. That's so much nicer. All right, now, so anybody remember, this should be review. Right now, is the stuff that I type here tied in any way to my component? Nope. So what do we need to keep track of that? Need some state, right? So let's do some state here. Use a property initializer. And let's just call it what it is, which is the username. When we first load the page, what should the username be? Empty string. Good choice. And then how do I tie that value of state to the input? Handle change event? Handle change will help us change the value, but how do I tie it there in the first place? Well, the onChange will help us change the value as we change it, right? But first we need to tie it to the value. So we'll just do, put this on a separate line. Value equals. And the value equals this dot state dot username, right? And then if we left it like this, we wouldn't be able to type, right? Because we just tied it to state and told state that the username is just an empty string. So now we need to do what Porter was saying, which is also give it a way to change the value. So we need our onChange handler. And we'll need to make a method that will do that for us. So we'll make one called handle change. It's an event handler, so it gets the event as an argument. And what do we want it to do? Update the username and state, meaning we would need to use what method? Set state. And there's a few ways we could do this. You've seen several. This is a pretty simple thing, so let's just set it. What's my username going to be equal to? Dot value, yep. The value of the event target, right? And then, just to make sure that's working, let's pass a second argument to set state. And just console log state. So remember, this function runs after set state has completed. So this would just be a way to check to make sure that our state looks like we expect it to look after we run that function. So we've got our console open. Yeah, so as we type, you can see we're getting our state updated. It's got the username correct. So that all looks good. Let's take the console log back out. We don't actually want to be logging that to the console. It's probably a good time for a commit. Link the form to state, and I think we also did the styling in that commit, and style it. All right, so looking at how this works on the finished product, we put in a username, right? So we're keeping track of that in state. And then when we submit, what happens? Search it and look at our URL. What did we actually do? Right? So when we submit, we need to take the value of the username and somehow tack it on to our URL, right? So if we're going to do that when we submit, what do we need first? Path, yeah, but we're doing it on submit, right? So we just need a submit handler. So let's put that on the form. So when we submit, we're going to run some function that we're going to call handle submit. So we'll go ahead and add that here. And again, since it is an event handler, we know that it's going to receive the event as an argument. And what's the first thing that happens when you submit something? Yeah, it submits and refreshes the page. And do we want that to happen? Nah. Who said yes? So let's prevent the default behavior. And so this is the new part. So we have prevented it from doing what it normally does. And we know that what we want to do is take that username, which we have in state, right? And we want to somehow push that onto the current location. So remember, when we're inside router, all of your child components get three things. They get the match prop, they get the history prop, and they get the location prop. Do anybody remember which one of those had all the methods on it for changing where you're at currently? Anybody want to take a guess? Match, history, or location? Location is a good guess, but not correct. It's history, right? Because it needs to keep track of where you've been. So we can just access that by this.props.history. And the method we're specifically looking for is we want to push a new location onto the history. And so looking at this, where are we going? We know we've got /GitHub, so that's always going to be part of it. And then this part is what? Whatever username we have, right? Which we stored in state. So we know the first part is just GitHub, right? And the second part Since we're using backticks, we can do string interpolation. We already stored it in state, so that's easy. We can say this.state.username.
So you're essentially adding where you're going to your history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of a weird way to think about it, but yeah, you're adding where you're going to your history. So I have now been here now that I pushed this event on there. And it's at the top of your history stack, so that's where you currently are. So let's see if that works. So we can put whatever we want in here. Say lookup user, and nothing really happens because we gave it no route to match that yet. So we still match /GitHub, right? Because that's still part of it. So we're still rendering this component. But it did successfully put what we had in the box on the URL. Easy enough, right? So let's say push username onto history when submitted.
Cannot read property push of undefined.
So it's saying you don't have a history object?
Maybe I just did. Oh wait, did you import something up at the top?
No.
It's React.
Did you do state as a property initializer or in a constructor?
Do you have a constructor in that component?
No constructor.
I would pop open my React DevTools and see what the problem is.
Yeah, because you should be able to see if you look at React DevTools and we search for the GitHub, you can see we've got the history, location, and match. And inspecting the history object, you should have a push method on there.
Is there a way, whenever your yarn starts, to open in Google Chrome versus Firefox?
Yeah, so if it's not opening in Chrome, then that just means your default browser is set to Firefox. Yeah, so if you set your whatever your default browser is to, it should be the one that it opens from the command line. All right, so let's look at our final product again.
If I submit it over and over on mine, it keeps adding GitHubs.
Did you do /GitHub or just GitHub? Here? Good question. Are you sure you didn't do /GitHub?
Mine looks just like yours, and mine does the add GitHub to it.
Hmm.